Hey, pastors and leaders, welcome to Spirit Anointed Leadership Podcast, a podcast designed to help, equip, encourage, and empower you as we go after our mission together. I'm so excited that you have joined us today, and I'm thrilled with the subject matter that we're going to talk about. Because today we're going to talk about women and men in ministry together. And I've got my great friend and colleague, Danielle Freed. We've been friends for 21 years.
Yep.
That's just so cool. Danielle, of course, is in charge. She's actually director of multiplication for us in the Great Lakes region, and a role that you've been in for a few years now. But we're going to talk about this subject. And man, when we dive into the subject, there are all kinds of opinions flying everywhere.
Right.
And so I would just love for us to dive into this together and talk about this subject in a way that we really hope anyways will be helpful and guide and direct some people, because I doubt that anyone comes to the subject without some baggage, without some preconceived ideas, without some convictions. Everyone kind of comes to the subject with something in their spirit.
Yep.
And so, Danielle, I know that the reason this particular subject is so important for us is because we really, as a Great Lakes region, want our pastors and want our congregations to reflect the culture that we're in within 10 years. So in other words, 10 years from now, we want to reflect the what's true about us as far as ethnicity is concerned in the GLR, but also what's true about us concerning gender. So in other words, we would love it if 10 years from now, we had 50% pastors that were women and 50% pastors that were men.
Yeah.
And we all know we've got a long ways to go to get to that, right? And what's so interesting about that is that we were the first denomination ever to ordain a woman.
Right.
And actually, you've done some great research about that.
Yeah.
So
and
talk about that.
Yeah, preparing for this podcast, I just was doing more research on this subject because it's something that is really, really important, but also something that I'm not overly passionate about. So I had to do my own research to say, okay, what really are the facts and what's really happening in this world? It turns out that the first female in the Wesleyan denomination to be ordained actually happened in the Great Lakes region in the Illinois district. And so this is something we should be really proud of and something we should continue to pursue.
That's fantastic. So you would, and that happened, over 100 years ago, that we ordained a woman for the first time. So you would think by now, after 100 years of history, that we'd have maybe 30 or 40% of our pastors that are women, but that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
And so often that is not happening because of a lack of leadership development that happens within the life of a woman who's in ministry. She just doesn't get the same opportunities. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about. But I'd really like to delve into the subject by talking a little bit about your background so that people get a sense of what it's been like for you, because I think you're a wonderful case study. So why don't we go back and let's talk about your own progression in ministry and being called into ministry. Talk to us about what that was like for you as a little girl and growing up.
Yeah, I remember being in middle school and high school and being at events, whether it was a youth convention or youth camp, and having this call to ministry time. I had never at that point ever seen a woman preach, never seen a woman on stage. They would have a call to ministry and I would feel something in my spirit, but I would think, and even now my heart starts to beat like, that's not real. Because I'd never seen it. Like, how could I imagine that could really be true? And so I would sometimes think, like I would even see some girls going down for a call to ministry and I would think, oh, they're probably going to be a missionary, which maybe some of them were.
Sure.
And I just would see myself thinking, I don't think I'm going to be a missionary. I'm from a town of 2,000 people. I'd never been on a plane. Like, it just didn't seem like the fit for me.
Okay.
And so as time progressed and these opportunities happened over and over again, finally at one point I thought, I know this is what I'm being called to do. I'm going to step out in faith, still having never seen a woman preach, never seen a woman in senior leadership, and I'm going to let the Lord do what he wants with my life. And so I gave that commitment to the Lord to be called into ministry, but had no idea exactly what that would look like. And so following high school, I went to Indiana Wesleyan. I really was still afraid to tell anybody I felt called to ministry, which is so sad to think about.
Yes.
But I would hide it and saying well, I think I'm going to do this communications major and I'm going to use that as a ministry. Well, then I was going to be a teacher and I'm going to use that as my ministry, all along knowing that was not really my calling.
You knew in your spirit.
Oh, for sure. I even had a moment where I was in a teaching practicum and I looked over this little girl's shoulder. I could see the playground over her shoulder. And I just thought, I am sure someone needs to teach this little girl math. But I know in my heart, I would actually fundraise my own income to take that little girl on the playground and tell her about Jesus. And that's when I knew this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so halfway through college, I switched my major and just began really following that calling to ministry.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that what's both exciting about that and sad about that is that it was both affirmed and not affirmed. Like you had some pretty influential people in your life get really excited about that, and some pretty influential people in your life say, I don't know, Danielle.
Yeah.
And so, which is not true for men, right? That, quite frankly, I think there are just as many men who are not necessarily fulfilling a call on their life. They, a sweet old lady pinched their cheeks at some point and said, "Oh, little son, I think you might be called to ministry." So they're following that.
Right.
Whether or not they're actually ordained by God and anointed by God to do that. But the exact same thing is true for women, even more so, right? Because you had people that affirmed it and people that also didn't affirm it.
Yeah.
Is that
I had
fair?
way more people not affirm it. I was told things like, well, you're going to marry a pastor, so you'll be in ministry anyway, or you're going to be a great pastor's wife, which I am a pastor's wife.
Yes.
Like, I can't deny that.
Right.
But I also knew in my calling and my spirit, I would have these thoughts, and I felt so guilty. Like, if I didn't marry John, where would I be? Because it wasn't that he was like a ceiling for me. It was just, I was always seen as his wife, or always seen as, this bonus. We were even told at one point, we were interviewing for a job, not this job, don't worry. And they said, Danielle, you have more education and experience for this job, but we're going to hire John. And the reasoning was they had had a negative experience with a female pastor. And so that just immediately had to reflect back to, that was the exact wording said, because we've had a bad experience with a female pastor. So you're already entering many situations on a defense.
Yes.
Like, how hurtful to just say that out the gate.
Right.
It turns out.
Because you would never say that about a male pastor. Oh, sorry, we're not going to hire you because we had a bad experience with a male pastor. So thank you, we love you, you're gone. So,
but then within like a year, they're like, oh, we really need you on our staff. We want to pay you. We want you to join our staff. And I was like, okay. And so it's like I had to wait and like prove myself in a way that other people definitely don't have to do.
Yeah. And this is something that you wouldn't say. I've had the privilege of knowing you and now working with you on the same team for the last couple of years, which has been just phenomenal. And I'll just say, you are a definite capital L leader. You are a leader. There's no doubt about it. And you're anointed by God. You're called by him. I see it all the time. And God has opened some great, great doors for you. And yet it's so interesting to me that we're in a culture where people don't know how to affirm that, even though we're part of the Wesleyan Church, where one of our distinctives is supposed to be this. We're still in a culture that doesn't know how to do that. And so one of the things that I think hinders a woman in ministry is the lack of opportunities to really be developed as a leader. Talk to me about how that has gone for you, what doors have been opened, how have you, quite frankly, have you had to open up some of your own doors? What has that been like for you?
Well, I would love to say, like, I think for the most part, we have gotten over this. We need to have women in ministry conversation. This is shifting to a different conversation of women actually leading, women as senior leaders. And that's where we get a lot more uncomfortable. Children's pastors, even youth pastors, executive pastors, great. But when we're saying to be the lead pastor, to be the head honcho, so to speak, that's where it gets a little more uncomfortable. And I think that gap is because there isn't that development area. It is true that women and men who co-pastor together, those women do get more opportunities.
Okay.
That's really sad. And I just want to be really like forefront in saying that that is my story. And the women who that's not their story have an even harder battle to fight. So when you have a male pastor spouse, it does make things a bit easier. And so what ends up happening, sometimes those women are learning over the shoulder of their husband, which is helpful, but also kind of sad.
Yes. Yeah.
I've actually had other women tell me they listen in on their husband's meetings, or their husband's getting the development. And so they're having conversations in the evening. It's just this gap where often John would be invited to places and I would say, who is there? Just curious. I'm not bitter, truly. Like, you know that. Like, I'm never sitting around like bitter and angry. Typically all white men. Not even a single female. I'm not even saying, well, I really deserve to be there.
Sure.
I just want a woman there.
Sure.
And so I would just hear that and think, wow, how sad that, I mean, literally like 40 men in an incredible leadership development opportunity. Not one single woman was invited. So I don't know if it's because they just don't think that those women they have to already be in a certain place to be there, but there's this place where we start to create a place where they can get in. You don't have to already be the senior leader, but if you think that person has the potential, let's bring them in.
Yeah. And let's talk about that for just a moment, because I think, and we're going to dive into some other things related to this, both in this podcast and the next podcast. But I want to talk for just a second about this concept of developing, women and men together, and what that looks like. And I think so often what happens is that pastors just say, well, I don't know if I should really invite a woman to this or not.
Right.
And here's what I think this is the sad part of it all, and we're just going to dive into the deep end of the pool. Here we go. Is with the high profile scandals that have happened over the last couple of years that have obviously included men being in situations that they shouldn't have been in, which is not the woman's fault. I just, now we all know it takes two to tango. I'm not saying about that, but we also understand that many times it's men who are abusing their positions of power and causing women to feel really, really awkward about, being in this situation or that situation. So I think my question to you is how do we balance the need for women to be developed in an area, because we want them to be, with the very real fact that the enemy is alive and well and trying to take everybody down, not just the men, but take everybody down. What are your thoughts about that? How do we attack that in a way that makes sense?
Well, some of these things have happened with other pastors, and some of them have just been other women. And so I think a key piece that I've even learned recently is let's stop talking about like men and women and just pastor to pastor. So if this person is really called of God, if they're really anointed by the Spirit to do this job that they're doing, and they need this male pastor to be a part of their development and their story and their journey and a part of an effective ministry, we have to learn to work as pastors, working alongside pastors. And so...
Or leaders working along leaders.
Because it's very off-putting to always feel like, because I'm a female, I'm a problem. Like a lot of these conversations...
And you need to reiterate that, because that is so key. They make you feel
like I literally feel myself pulling back, because you almost feel shameful. When in reality, I've done nothing but say, I'm here with open hands to serve the Lord. But I feel questioned, or I feel like a problem, or I feel like a hurdle that someone has to navigate, or I feel like this awkward tension of like, in the real world, this would not be a problem. But for some reason at church, it's super awkward. I have to be like on pins and needles, which really doesn't help you chase the calling that the Lord's put before you. It just makes you feel like I have bigger hurdles to jump that I'm watching the men near me. They don't have to jump.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that really we need to talk about as it relates to that is, pastors, and let's just talk about male pastors for a few minutes. And we're going to talk more about this again in our second podcast. But in reality, there's a sense in which they need to go alone with the Lord and work this through in their own relationship with the Lord. Because I think so often what happens is that they look at a scandal and they just say, well, that ain't going to be me. I'm not going to make that same mistake. And so what ends up happening is that they never make the effort and take the time to actually develop 50% of their congregation. So they're leaving 50% of the potential of their church on the table. And all the women get it. It's like so-and-so is not going to develop a woman. We don't see it anywhere. And going back to your childhood, it's so sad and so true today. How often do we actually see a woman on stage? Actually leading and leading in a top position, as you said. And that is so necessary and so key. But I think men have got to work that through in their own world, in their own reality, right? And if they don't do that, let me ask you this question. And it's not a question I was planning on asking you beforehand, but it's, how can you tell if a guy is safe to work with and is going to empower you? What is maybe a characteristic or two of people that you can tell, this person, they're going to, and what would you encourage our listeners and our watchers to develop as far as characteristics? This is someone that's going to be safe to work with. That makes sense.
they're not afraid to encourage you. So some men are intimidated by women for various reasons.
Okay.
It's not always about attraction. It's they're a strong person or a strong personality, or, ooh, I just worry about how things might, shake down if I put this person in leadership. But when that person is genuine with you, when they show that they care about you, they know you, they're not nervous to talk to you, they're not nervous to email you or call you up on the phone. Some people are just funny. They'll always want to CC somebody else into your email. And I get guardrails,
sure.
But it's like, you can call me or you can email me or I can come and meet you and talk with you. When I've had really valuable moments of being like led and being taught really well, this person gets to know my heart in not a weird way,
right.
but like in a genuine, I care about you and I want you to grow as a leader. They listen really well, and then they're not afraid to speak the truth. There's this other piece that we've talked about where sometimes you finally get a woman, then you're going to begin developing her, and you just only give encouragement. You don't actually give any constructive feedback. I actually feel better when someone can tell me, here's a way you can grow. Right. And I know some people are really nice, like, well, really, there's nothing. No, there's got to be something, because I have not got it all figured out. I know that for sure. And so those are some of the things when you just feel like an equal. You don't feel like that I have to have all these barriers to get connected. When they are really just with you on the mission, not, taking you as a token or just being kind because it's the right thing to do, but they're genuinely like shoulder to shoulder, eye to eye, let's lead together.
And you can tell that.
Totally.
You absolutely can tell that.
Yep.
If we're going after this mission together, then I can tell that we're in this thing together, and here we go. Right. And there's a relationship there that's appropriate, that's loving, that is mutually encouraging, that's mutually edifying. Because I learned in our relationship, Danielle, I learned so much from you. I really enjoy being in a room and just learning from you. When we're in a staff meeting, or even the few times we're on one-on-one, the only reason that's not more is because I don't have the privilege of actually being your direct supervisor. But when we are in those conversations, it's really helpful for me. I just glean so much from you. But it really is, you can tell the difference between situations where you're a token and situations when it's genuine.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Danielle, I just want to say thank you so much. We're going to continue this conversation in our next podcast, but I just want to say thank you for your willingness to continue fighting in a loving way. and what I mean by that is that you had said early on in this podcast, look, this is not a passion of mine. Women in ministry is not a passion of mine to make sure that we go forward in every way. But God keeps putting me in positions where he's asking me to advocate. And so I'm trying to be faithful to those positions where God has asked me to advocate. And you're doing a great job of that.
Thank you.
But I also want to say, I want to make kind of a, if you will, a gender to gender apology for the ways that we as males haven't done a better job at equipping and empowering and encouraging you to go after the mission that God has placed in your own heart. And that we can see, as a result of that, more and more people come to Jesus. We don't want to leave 50% of the potential on the table.
That's right.
It's just too important. Our mission is too important. Heaven and hell are in the balance.
Right.
It's too important. So thank you again for being with me, being with us today. I look forward to our next conversation. And I just want to say thank you again for joining us for this edition of Spirit Anointed Leadership Podcast and VCast. We're so delighted to have you. And please come back and join us for our series 2, if you will, of this podcast and VCast. And make sure that you share this. Make sure that you like us. We really want to do that. Make sure you subscribe. Please subscribe. That's really, really helpful for us. Again, thanks so much for being with us. We look forward to you and us being together for the next edition of Spirit Anointed Leadership.